While others celebrate the wins,
Yes.
We celebrate the mud.
each episode has a special guest.
Tony-nominated actress, Broadway's Lily Cooper.
Tashir Zameda.
David A. Gregory.
Getting messy with muddy topics.
We are going to be talking about grief journey.
With hilarious moments
Now get over here.
And deep conversations.
I'm ashamed to even admit this, but this is what happened.
This is Into the Mud.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Into the Mud podcast. While others celebrate the wins,
We celebrate the month.
you're never not going to laugh on that
I
intro.
always laugh on that.
Every
I
time
don't
I'm
know
editing,
why.
there's always a giggle. I love it.
Okay, sorry for bringing joy. Well, we are coming to you from the Barrow Lounge at the mall in West Village.
You're Alex Kumin.
You're Drew King.
And today we have a dear friend on the podcast. We're super excited to welcome the amazing, incredible John Lagucki.
Hi.
Hi, John.
Hi. Thanks for having me in this gorgeous 1970s den.
It is
know.
an absolute
village.
70s day.
You quite literally live in this space.
Yeah,
with
this
the
is-
sash
this is
and
where
the
you were
glasses.
born.
Boys in the band outfit.
Yeah, we're twinning today, not just the
Absolutely.
mustache, but
I
the
know.
vibe.
We
Everything.
could be brothers, but
We
we're
could
not
be, but we're
brothers.
not. Yeah.
I
No.
love that.
Unfortunately,
Unfortunately.
not.
No.
I know. Oh
I
my
would love that.
gosh.
Can you imagine?
So that would be amazing. I would love that.
I could, yeah.
So John, you are primarily what I know you to be.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, I met you as an actor performer.
Yes.
So you are
Yeah.
also in the entertainment
Yeah,
arts.
I like to say like I'm a recovering former BFA musical theater major. Yeah,
Recovering former
Yeah,
BFA.
yeah,
I love
yeah.
that.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent.
And then now you work frequently, regardless of whether it's hobby or if it's being paid.
Yeah.
You are a brilliant, beautiful, exquisite photographer.
Thank you.
Yes.
And
That's
in
so sweet.
particular,
Yes.
like a queer nightlife photographer. So you
Yeah.
spend a lot of your time documenting really beautiful, unique, interesting queer spaces.
Yeah.
So give us like a rundown of like what your work is and what you like to focus
Yeah.
on.
So I'm a portrait and nightlife photographer in New York, I would say. My photography has been described as timeless gay photography because I really am like inspired by like the colors and the look of like the 70s to the 90s and specifically like queer spaces. So think like black and white shots of like Studio 54 where everyone's just like having a good time. It's like high contrast
Yeah.
with flash. And then also like I love like Tama Finland sketches, which are like
Do you know
not
Tama Finland,
yeah.
Alex?
I don't.
Alex does not know Tama Finland.
Okay,
Do you want
yeah.
to explain?
And
Yeah.
make sure I'm embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
No.
Loser.
Tama Finland was a sketch artist in like the 80s, 70s, 80s, and his art was primarily like homoerotic art, but it kind of like created a style of like leather man culture.
Oh,
Everything was
okay,
very
okay.
cartoony and kind of playful, but not like overly sexual. So
Okay.
I kind of love to find that in photography. Like I think it's so easy to just take a picture of a hot guy,
Yeah.
but like how can I make it like a little bit more subdued, a little bit more playful and
Wow.
like narrative photography is
Yeah.
what that would be described as. So I do a lot of portraits, friends, and I've taken Drew's pictures before.
I took my photos for it was my 18-year anniversary in New York City.
Yes.
Because I wanted to document my time
Yeah,
here. I'm coming up on
absolutely.
20 now.
So
But it
what
was
did
like
you
a-
do? When
we-
you are, can I actually ask this in
Yeah,
the context
yeah.
of
Uh-huh.
when you are talking to someone about doing portrait photography,
Yeah.
like what's the process? How do you
Oh my
like,
gosh.
figure out
Yeah.
what, yeah.
So it kind of just depends. Usually I can tell by looking at someone's Instagram feed, like what they're kind of looking for. If they're looking for more like underwear shoots or if they're like an OnlyFans creator, and we kind of go with that. But I'm pretty straightforward with telling people that I don't shoot porn. I don't want to do anything that's so like R-rated. And people are really appreciative usually of that. I always try to make people feel comfortable if I'm in a studio space or in someone's home. There's a lot of stories of like the creepy photographer that is like asking
Not
to-
you. That's never you.
No. Ooh, no. But I'm always like very mindful of that because I've like post for people who are creepy photographers. So I'm
Yeah.
always like keeping that in the back of my mind.
What are some of the things that you do to make sure that people feel like,
Oh, it's like all a conversation,
Yeah.
like while taking photos. And
Yeah.
I like to show people as especially if I'm in a studio
Yeah.
shoot or someone's home, like, oh my gosh, I love this shot. This is kind of what we're looking at, like lighting and wise. Because it's totally like a conversation. And I think all art, any art form is best when it's like collaborative. So I try to like bring that into photography as well in terms of posing and inspiration and all that. Yeah.
Love that.
But
And
I-
so was
yeah.
your 18-year?
Yeah, I just wanted it to be like, oh, this is so New York-y.
Yeah.
So it was like we shot at the Met Museum of Art. We went up to the
We went
rooftop.
all over
we
the
went
city.
a lot.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's that outside bar at the rooftop of the Met, and you
Yeah.
get like a really beautiful view of Central Park, and then all the
Yeah.
buildings peeking up out from the background, which is beautiful.
It's really,
Yeah.
Beautiful shots.
Oh my
We got
gosh.
nice museum shots. And then, of course, I was like, take a photo of me eating a slice of pizza.
Yes.
And then, like, is there a cab in the background? Like, it was
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
tacky.
We went to Fordham
that's
too.
I went to
amazing.
Fordham, so
Yeah.
we went to the Fordham campus, and I just like
Great.
awkwardly stood in front of like the Fordham
Yeah.
sign. So,
Perfect.
but we got beautiful shots. And
Yeah.
it was like a really lovely commemoration
Yeah.
of my time in New York City.
I love that.
And you lived here for how long?
Oh my gosh. Since August of 2018.
Okay.
So not very long, but a nice chunk of time.
chunk, yeah.
Yeah, I think anyone who lived in New York City during the chunk of the pandemic and lockdown can add like an additional 5 years. I think
Yeah.
we need to like say that's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it feels like I've been here for an eternity.
Yeah.
But
In my memory, you've been here forever.
yeah,
But we met in 2020. I always forget that we met in a queer book club.
that's
That's how we
met.
first met.
Queer book
Oh my
club.
Yeah, during the pandemic, there were a bunch of mo's that came
Yes.
together and like did a gay book club.
Yeah,
I love that.
And
What'd you read?
It started with Red, White, and Royal Blue. Then
Which
we read
is now
a movie.
a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then we read Larry Kramer's Faggots.
Uh-huh.
And then
We read a lot of.
there was a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah. What was the French book? There was the
I
the
forget.
French author, and it was it's this gay French book. And fun fact, it was translated by all people by Molly Ringwald. So did you know
Okay.
Did I read this book?
Yes, you did. Yeah, I think it's called
Okay.
Lie With Me, Lay With Me by. Oh, it's coming back. Lie With Me.
Lie With Me, yes, yeah.
Henri Bresson or something like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait.
And it's
is
translated
he
by.
also a foot? Wait a minute.
gosh.
Maybe.
No, I have a book.
Everyone
Oh, no.
delete. Maybe that's
No,
Henri
because I
Bresson is
went.
the photographer, and I'm
I
confusing.
went to the Henry
French
Bresson
name.
Museum.
Okay, so
last
then
year.
lies. It's
Okay.
not.
No, but
that's
it's-
not his name. I
it's
don't know.
what-
Another
his
French
name.
anyways.
person.
We'll look
Well,
it
we're
up.
getting all.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting all over the
So what you're
place.
saying is
Delete all
all
that.
French people are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
honestly,
Wow, Drew.
Yeah.
Your words, not mine.
Anyway,
Um,
beautiful book. But it was
yeah.
like interesting reading this book because there's like some graphic sex scenes. And so I'm just imagining Molly Ringwald being like, how do you translate blowjob into English? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know why Molly Ringwald now has a
we
British
should
accent.
right.
We should have Cecilia.
Oh my God, I should.
That was fun. I totally forgot about that's how we met. Because in my mind I was like, was it class?
book club.
It was gay book club.
And guess who I saw today?
who?
Nick Leonard.
Oh.
Yes, who was also in Gay Book Club with
we
us.
love
And I saw
this.
him at the
We
Disney
love Gay
offices
Book Club.
today.
Yes, because he works for
Yes,
Disney.
yes. So funny. Okay, well, I feel like I'm taking us way off topic. We gotta
we
rein
have
it
so
in and
much. We
focus
have
on
so
why we're here
much.
because
Yeah.
we gave you a one sheet with questions that really was 3
17
sheets
pages.
long.
Yes, it was
Because I think
17
we
pages.
had like 20 questions or something.
Yeah.
We had so many
yeah.
questions to ask.
Yeah. For lack
so-
of a better term, it is a muddy subject.
It is a muddy subject.
Yeah.
It is a very muddy subject. So today we are going to talk about the stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS and maybe the disappearance of queer history and queer culture in today's society, especially with our generation
Yes,
of
yeah.
gays. Alex, you're not involved in this because you're
Yeah.
you're a
I'm not
straight.
gay.
Oh, wait, what? Wait, my glasses are dirty.
And this was prompted. I wanted to have this conversation because you made an Instagram post on World AIDS Day, which was last week.
Yeah,
I
last
believe?
Monday. Yeah.
Last Monday.
Yeah, last Monday.
More or less, what did the post say? It said like we should be talking about this, or why aren't we?
Yeah,
talking about
I was
this
saying
more?
that they're like we lost an entire generation of artists because of AIDS, and we rarely talk about it.
Yeah.
which I think is true. I talk about it a lot in like my circles, but I
You
think
do,
as
yeah.
like a community,
Societally, we don't
yeah.
talk about any.
No,
But
yeah,
it's still a hush-hush topic when it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And even though we, as cisgendered queer men, white men in the community, we see it often on the apps when we're going on dates, or people they'll disclose it in their dating profiles and such.
Yeah.
But majority of the rest of the country and or the world isn't really talking about it unless it's directly affecting their community.
Yes, exactly.
So before we dive in, can you explain your situation, your status, and your history and personal journey with this in particular?
Of course. So I was diagnosed with HIV when I was 16 years old.
So
I was in high school, And I grew up in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio. And we were talking about this before we started, but I'm grateful to have grown up in Columbus because it's a nice, like, liberal pocket in a densely red state. So while I was very young, I was able to get treatment very quickly, thanks to my parents and thanks to just like the great healthcare system of Columbus. Yeah, it was such a wild time. I mentally block a lot of that experience out of my mind just because I was one, so young. So it's like a lot of us, we barely remember details from when we were 16, but I remember it like HIV matured me very quickly and I had to learn a lot of things very quickly.
Of course. While in high school.
Yeah.
It's a really young age
Yeah.
to get a diagnosis.
Yeah, especially while you are starting to explore your sexuality and you're starting to like find out who you are, like you have this really big capital letter definer placed on you. So that was really wild. And the hardest thing about it, like I said, I was able to get treatment really quickly and very privileged to have gotten treatment very quickly. The hardest thing to learn and weave my way through was like the dense stigma around HIV and AIDS, which we're going to talk about a lot today, I'm sure. But yeah, so that was wild. Going to college was weird because when you're diagnosed with HIV, you kind of take on this role of being an educator and you're kind of forced to educate your community, sexual partners, friends, anyone that you disclose your status to. And you have to be well informed because you have to basically tell people that like their perception of HIV and AIDS is, if it's wrong, you have to basically prove them that it's wrong. Yeah, so it was a wild time. But yeah, 16 in high
How
school.
did you find out? Was it just routine testing? Did you have a partner who informed you?
Yeah, so I just got tested just from I went to a clinic and got a test, and it
So
was,
you were sexually active at that point?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I was, and yeah, it just was a wild, random phone call. It was like April 1st is when I found out. It was like that nice little April Fool's joke.
Was
April
it on
Fool's.
your radar at all?
No, but when I got the call, I remember I was sitting in my parents' living room and there's like a phone on a cord like behind the couch that I was on. And I picked the call and I think I just kind of knew. I don't remember a lot of that. My parents are probably terrified because they're like, they were like my age in the 80s. So it's like, I can't even imagine what their thoughts were, but it was definitely one of those things that we like learned and grew together with HIV. But
perception of it has changed drastically since the 80s.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like what it was like in the 80s versus now, and in terms of also just like treatment and what we know about it?
Yeah. So I believe it was 1981 is when the CDC first like was starting to look into HIV and AIDS. So for like HIV for dummies, like HIV is a disease that attacks your blood, your white blood cells, and affects your immune system, basically allowing your body to take on opportunistic infections. So no one like dies from AIDS, you die from an opportunistic infection because your immune system is so weak. So people were getting very sick very quickly, and smart doctors were looking into it and reporting on it. So throughout the 80s, it was primarily affecting gay men, or the science term is like men who have sex with men. In New York, San Francisco, these communities that were like dense pockets of queer people.
And on the cusp also of like a sexual like a sexual freedom, liberation. It was a big moment.
Yeah.
That's do you know the play or which was then turned into a movie, The Normal Heart?
No.
Really beautiful. I'll give you a copy of it. But they discuss a lot of it in The Normal Heart. But the pushback from the community that was people still wanted to be having unprotected sex, even though they knew the warning signs were out there, because it was such a moment of sexual liberation and freedom for them.
It was
to be like,
right after Stonewall.
Right after Stonewall, to be like, we just want to fuck around and live our lives and have fun and not feel confined anymore. So then to have this pandemic come through and then throw you back into the sexual closet was really frustrating for people.
And also for our listeners who are not as familiar with Stonewall, and because we are literally steps away.
Right.
We're literally right around
It's right down the street.
We are right around the corner from Stonewall. could we have a Stonewall for Dummies?
Yeah, so
Yep.
the Stonewall riots were 1969,
1969.
and it was basically the community's first pushback to oppression, specifically from the cops, led by trans women of color, and it kind of exploded like queer liberation all across the country. It was like really quick responses in the West Coast, and it like days of riots, and then each year following, like Pride was marked with Stonewall. So that's why Pride is in June, is because of Stonewall. And
it was literally just police officers
They
going to
raided. They were raiding the
Stonewall.
bar. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yeah.
there were queer
Yeah.
spaces around, many cities, but in particular, there were queer spaces in New York City that were being targeted, in particular, by the cops.
Yeah.
And they were raiding them. They were arresting people, and then they were publishing their names in the newspaper and humiliating them. People were losing their jobs and their families because they were being outed as homosexuals and in publications. And so this was a first. Stonewall was like a safe space for the queer community.
Yeah.
And the cops came in and raided them, and then that's what pushed back. And that's why the
Pushback, literally like a
Yeah, it turned
literally
into
like
riots. Yes.
riots. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And then that's why we say Pride today, the Pride Parade is very different today than what it was back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And they say, or back in the 70s and the 80s, that Pride, what is it? Pride was a riot.
Pride was a riot. Pride
was
is a riot.
It is a
Pride
riot.
Yeah.
So now it's, it's colorful, it's fun, people are dancing, there's music, and people are in Speedos and they're living their life, which is great.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful celebration. But it started as a riot. In particular, it was started by trans women of color in particular.
Marsha P. Johnson,
Marsha P. Johnson.
Sylvia
Yeah.
Rivera.
Yeah.
Who's a huge topic.
Yeah.
So that's Stonewall.
That's
so this
Stonewall.
is like a little bit of like queer
Yeah.
history 101.
But imagine like
loving.
like a decade before, like a little more than a decade before AIDS, this queer liberation happened, and everyone was like on like high with like we get to live our lives, and people are starting to come around. And then this thing comes along and like wipes out your friends and your colleagues and lovers, and it's just like terrifying. And then that is like fuel to the fire for all these Republicans,
traditional values, like traditional family values organizations.
To be like, and because it's a disease that is contracted most commonly through sex, it was a way for people to be like, oh yeah, they're perverted, they deserve this. And that's where a lot of stigma stems from, is like shaming other people and shaming people of a specific community, when it's proven that like HIV and AIDS doesn't affect just gay men.
Right.
It was like, I was looking at statistics last night, and it was like 23-ish% of infections in 2022 were through heterosexual contact, which I thought was so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because
we talked about this last week in the episode that you and I recorded of I don't know what order we're going to be releasing these all in, so I'll get a little snapshot, but I was sexually abused when I was 5 and got HPV, and I have also had cancer 3 times, and so I have seen both sides of having an infection, a disease, and how differently we react to sexually transmitted anything. And it's truly wild how much stigma is attached to anything that is sexually related. Because we're such a puritanical society based on sex is bad, which is so wild because it's not.
It's not.
It's really
literally
it's really
the thing.
not.
It's
And rather than just choosing to educate young people before they become sexually active about their bodies and everything, and how you can have safer sex, and how it's also okay to everything's okay. Everything's okay.
Correct.
But we stigmatize anything related to it. So it really is. I'm so excited that we're getting to chat with you. It feels very adjacently personal to me as well.
Especially because you were talking about education. I mean, I was in a sex ed class that semester when I got HIV. So it's just, it's crazy. But back to like talking about.
So back to, So where were we?
Well, I'm curious. I'm actually curious how I'm gathering from context clues that your family was really generous and kind with you in regards to dealing with this. That's certainly not the case. We know historically that there were many gay men in particular who were dying of AIDS, and their families wouldn't even come to their bedsides because they were so ashamed and humiliated of them, which is so like fucking devastating and heartbreaking. And lots of beautiful shows and plays and movies, all written about those experiences. I'll dump them all on you, and you can read them.
Wait, and we'll put it in the notes.
Yes, exactly. But it's I'm happy to hear that it sounds like your family was very responsive and kind.
Yeah.
I guess it's a twofold question. I'm thinking when I first came out, there were certain family members. For the most part, my family was really great when I came out of the closet. But there was a few responses I would get from time to time from people that were like, we're just so concerned though, because you're going to get AIDS and die.
Yeah.
That was in 2000, I don't know, like 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
So, and I know that the tides are shifting, thank God, but how did you, I'm assuming that your parents being of another generation, having grown up in the 80s, maybe having had peers and had interactions with AIDS, what was their response? Did they have the same reaction? Did they say anything like that to you?
I'm sure they did. The thing is, I rarely have talked to my parents about what their reaction was or anything, just because it's something that I feel like I just lived through us learning about HIV and AIDS together, and they were so generous with not really stigmatizing me or throwing anything on that. And like you said, like I know so many queer people who have had that experience, or their family would be like, I just want you to be happy and healthy, and I'm so worried that you're going to get AIDS and die. Which I hear that all the time. I'm like, oh gosh. But it is real. I mean, the media and everything, there's so much negativity around HIV and AIDS, and especially like
stigma.
Misinformation and everything. And if you're a straight person in the 80s, you're so far removed from everything that's actually happening, unless you know someone who got HIV and AIDS. There was that guy who was on The Real World in the 90s.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
I wish I remember his name.
It was Real World season 1, wasn't it? Season 1?
Yeah, it was one of the earlier seasons, and he was very open about his HIV status on TV, and really like open. Yeah, it really like brought HIV and AIDS as an issue into people's homes,
into pop culture.
Yeah, and this is also a time when like Reagan wasn't talking about HIV and AIDS on purpose, and like no one was really talking about it. So that's. I lost my train of thought.
It still trickles through today. I do want to very quickly. I want to ask. Can you can you define the difference between HIV and AIDS? Because I think we so commonly just say HIV/AIDS.
Yes. Yeah.
Slash.
Yeah. So HIV is the like HIV can turn into AIDS, if that makes sense. So AIDS is when your like CD4 count and basically when your immune system is so weak that it can't build new white blood cells to fight off.
It's like past the point of no
yes,
return.
okay. Essentially that's what it is.
Okay.
There's a specific number for it and like a threshold, and I don't know it off the top of my head. But it's basically when HIV turns into something that's so bad that your body basically can't protect itself, and that's when you get AIDS.
Yeah.
I think it's like the average life expectancy once you get AIDS is like 3 years. But there are things that you can do. There are like medicines that you can take to like live longer. And there are people who were diagnosed with AIDS in like the 80s and 90s who are like still alive today, which is cool and wonderful.
We have a friend who
I was just
on,
thinking.
who was on as a guest who is like just retiring right now, and he was diagnosed in the 80s as well.
Yeah.
And he's maintained like a really healthy, wonderful lifestyle and a beautiful, rich, full life.
Yeah. Love science.
Yes.
Yeah. That's something I want to touch on, is like this idea of like, I'm afraid you're going to get AIDS and die.
Yeah.
That, like we really associate those two so closely together, but that is really not, it's not a death sentence.
No,
it's not by any means necessarily a death sentence. And so could you talk a little bit about even like, I know in the 80s it was, very difficult and there was not a lot of information in the public, but even now, like I see like PrEP commercials all over the place and like stuff like that. Like, could you talk
Subway
a little
ads.
bit? Yes, Subway. Like it's way more out there now, I think, at least in New York. So could you talk a little bit about like how things have improved in the on the like the medical and like treatment side of it?
Yeah, it's really actually incredible. When I was diagnosed, I think I was on one of the earlier treatments that was just one pill a day. So I don't know if you heard the term like the cocktail. It was like something that was used in the 90s and early 2000s where people were taking like multiple pills a day, like wake up, take
handfuls of
2
pills,
pills, like at 3 p.m. when an alarm goes off, take another pill, take 3 pills at night. Like it was like lots of meds, and people had to be very diligent about it. And I was taking meds like once at night, and it was brought my status down to undetectable. So like an undetectable status is when HIV is so hidden in like your blood that it's undetectable by like modern day science. Essentially, is like undetectable for dummies, and it's really incredible, and it's proven that an undetectable status is untransmittable. So if someone has an undetectable status, they can't pass on HIV, which is really cool to think that that's where we're at for more than 40 years later.
Yeah. And also confusing. This reminds me very much of HPV as well.
Yeah.
Because you can have HPV and then it goes away and then it comes back and it goes away. And it's like this, it's confusing to talk about with people. It's like you're just...
Yeah. And I always like to say, and this might be, and feel free to use this. Once I got this in my head, I was like, I have to use this. But the same people who like trusted the COVID vaccine are the same people who will like stigmatize me and be like, I don't trust U equals U. I don't trust undetectable equals untransmittable.
Wow.
And I'll be like, oh, so that's the stigma right there.
Yeah.
That's you taking your thoughts and your assumptions about HIV and AIDS and putting it onto me. Because I'm like, oh, you trusted science then.
So why don't you trust science?
Yeah. It's because they're like, well, HIV is something different. I'm like, well, it's not. They'd be like, oh, HPV is something different. I'm like, it's not. They're sexually transmitted diseases, and you're just attaching shame and stigma to that.
Why do you think... I'm just interested because I don't have an answer for it all these years later. But what makes it so stigmatized? Like, why do people get so...
What's the shame?
Yeah,
you brought
shame.
you brought up earlier the shame because it's something that relates to sex, and people are just like, it's so easy to attach shame to it. Also, queer people and gay people were being discriminated left and right in the 80s, so it was just there was poor media and misinformation all over talking about like this specific type of gay man was getting HIV, and like people would say people were deserving of it because of their lifestyle choices. And that puts a lot of shame on the people who are actually affected by it. And then it makes it harder for people to be open to getting tests.
Right.
People are like, I don't want to get a test because I don't want people to see me that way.
Right.
Or there's a fear. There's a fear that they like,
if I get
what
a
if I
test?
get it? Or, and I'm positive.
Yeah.
But
what's the like one in, do you know how many?
Oh gosh.
I don't know.
I do. Well, yes. I do know that there are 1.2 million people living with HIV in America today.
Okay.
And out of all those people, 13% of them don't know they have it. That's like a scary statistic to know about. And those 13% people probably don't know that they have it because they aren't seeing in their community encouragement to go get tested. They don't know where to get a test. They probably think that testing is expensive when it's free, especially if you live in a great state like New York. Also like 49% of the new HIV infections in America in 2022 were in the South, which I learned.
Wow.
I was looking up statistics that were going to like help with talking about stigma. And like,
do you think that's because it's like the Bible Belt and it's more conservative and more traditional values, and so we don't talk about sex that happens in the darker corners?
And I also think it's because many clinics are getting shut down across the country,
as well.
Parenthoods and all these things that offer life-saving medical treatment and testing that are just known as abortion clinics and get shut down, and that is the places where people go for healthcare.
And for sex education.
And sex education.
Period.
Yes.
And sex education that is primarily focused on heteronormativity.
Yes.
That is the main thing, because it's like no school in the South wants to talk about gay people having sex.
No.
To high schoolers. That's like
no
a big
school
no-no.
in America wants to talk about sex, full stop.
Period.
That's did you, I was in sex education for 7 years before I did stand up, but in Ohio, red state. Do you remember your sex ed? I remember you said you...
It was like so outdated. I remember probably the only time that we would talk about HIV and AIDS was probably like a page in a textbook that we like had to read on our own.
And it was like, this is bad. I mean, I remember all that. Was STIs, STDs back then, but these are bad, and you're a whore slut if you get one.
Yeah, exactly.
And imagine
And it's
being
like-
in high school and you're like, I don't know. Like back then I was
Yes.
probably so bi, and not bi erasure, but like I was still like, no, oops, no. But it's still like I had no idea who I was.
Yes.
So
No,
I
it's
was
damaging.
like,
I remember that. I
Yeah.
remember being like, oh, I guess I'm dirty. I guess I'm a bad person.
Yeah.
And it's
It's-
like,
it's
no,
terrifying.
it's not. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that the reason why the South has the most of new HIV and AIDS infections is because of clinics moving money out of healthcare. And also, like we haven't talked about yet, but like HIV and AIDS, like we've known about it through the media and everything. Even in movies and these plays, centers HIV and AIDS around white cis men. And like HIV and AIDS today is like the largest population of people who are getting HIV and AIDS are people of color over white people. So like it's not something that just affects cis white men. And in the 80s, it was easier for people to digest that because of racism, and it just is a whole mess. But another reason why that it's primarily affecting people of color is because of like lack of like getting healthcare, and because resources are getting pulled out of communities, and it's so concerning and sad and heartbreaking
And so disproportionate.
Yeah.
Even the fact that, I mean, yes, it's we all know the healthcare system is such a fucking nightmare, and trying to navigate it is so tricky, even for us as like privileged white educated people. Like it's even a challenge for us to navigate it. And so even though yes, there are resources of like PrEP is free, you can go to almost any clinic and get free condoms. Like there is access to sexual health care in free capacity, but even for me, sometimes it's hard to figure out and find. Or like if I've run out of insurance, I'm like trying to get back on PrEP without insurance is like a whole headache and a nightmare. And so it's still made very challenging sometimes. I guess I don't want to put that out there and say it's hard, don't bother with it. But I'm saying it's still
it's hard.
It's complicated.
It's not an easy system to navigate.
There's so much red tape, and there's still a lot of barriers that should not be there. It should be so accessible to everybody, but it's not. So, and also similarly, a lot of surprisingly many STIs don't show symptoms. They're asymptomatic. So like, you know, I've had an STI before and I thought that I was totally fine. But really it was like, oh, like, girl, you had chlamydia the whole time. Like, it's just like, you're like, it's like sneaky. And there's no symptoms up front for HIV. So it's not easy for people to be like, oh, something's going on. I gotta go to the doctor and figure this out or get tested. So a lot of it does lie in silence. And then because of stigma, like I know of some people who don't want to get tested because they're afraid of something popping up. And I'm like, okay, but it's your responsibility as a sexually active person to be testing and taking care of yourself.
Especially as a member of our community. And there's the whole thing of like, we keep ourselves safe, like we keep our community safe. But people will go get like a panel of STI testing and like not take an HIV/AIDS test. They'll be like, everything else except that, I don't need that.
Interesting.
The doctor asks me that sometimes. They're like, when I get tested, like they'll say like, they're like, okay, do you want the full panel? I'm like, yes. And they're like, and then they'll say, do you also want an HIV test? And I'm like,
throw it
that is
in.
part of the full panel. I said full
the whole
panel.
thing.
But it's interesting that even sometimes medically they separate them.
It was separated for me. I went in for a GI visit. They were like, do you want to I was like, throw it in there.
Throw it in, why not?
Especially if you live in a state where it's free and it's supported, like, why not? Like, especially when it is not difficult to live with HIV today.
Yeah, tell us about it today. What's day
so
to day?
I take one pill a day at night, and that's it. I have friends that have HIV that get a shot every month, which is new and scary because I've gotten this routine since I was 16 of taking one pill a day that I can't even, it's such a part of my life now that I can't even imagine just taking one shot. In Europe, there's like one shot every 6 months now, that's being tested. It's crazy.
Is the pill that you take, is that covered by insurance? Do you pay out of pocket?
It is, So there's a program through New York State called ADAP. I forget what it stands for, but it's like a New York State uninsured care program. And if your income is below a certain level, you can basically get free or affordable health care that's from the state for certain pre-existing conditions, which is wonderful and also so scary because the new administration, we have no idea what that's going to look like.
Yes.
But yeah, my medicine is, for lack of a better term, very affordable.
Great.
And I'm very privileged for that. I'm very thankful. And it's always been very affordable. Because when I was younger, there was like the Ryan White Act. Ryan White was like one of the first people to be diagnosed with AIDS who was of like a younger generation. I believe he was in like middle school or high school when he died. And
Yeah, see, I remember this. He got it
through a blood transmission.
through a blood transfusion.
Yeah.
And that's why it was publicized,
Yeah.
probably?
Yeah, and it kind of shifted the conversation on, it's not just only gay men that get AIDS.
Yeah.
That it's shifting and it's spreading into different pockets of different communities.
Yeah.
So the Ryan White Act basically allowed for HIV and AIDS treatment to become a little bit more affordable, I think. But I knew that because of the act, I was able to get very affordable treatment and medicine, and got to that one pill a day, eventually became undetectable. It's so easy. I just go get blood work every 6 months, and it's wonderful because if you don't get blood, like I don't think I would have gotten blood work as often if I didn't have HIV, but they do like everything, not just
Iron
HIV AIDS.
count,
Yes,
like,
like
they're looking at
everything.
everything.
I'm looking at my
B12,
metrics on
yes.
the like Mount Sinai portal. I'm like, oh, look at that. It's like a scale. I'm like, why is it a little bit that way?
HDL.
Oh my God,
Looking
yes, the
good.
scale.
Yeah,
I
I'm
always
like,
get so spooked by the
yeah,
scale.
I'm like, it's a little bit low, but like still in the green.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
But I'm so grateful to have had such an easy time with treatment, but still with insurance, it gets funky. I've had many a time where I'm like 2 or 3 pills left and something happened with insurance and I have to get on the phone for forever. But it always works out, which is crazy. Because I know that's not the case for a lot of people.
Right.
Can I ask you, because this is a conversation about a sexually transmitted infection.
Yeah.
So we got to talk about sex.
Period.
So what is sex like for you today in your interactions?
Yeah.
You're single, correct?
No, I'm in a relationship now.
I didn't know that, John.
Okay, John.
Yeah. Okay,
I'm so happy for
John's
you.
off the market.
Okay, great.
Bye.
Well, then wonderful. Happy about that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Prior to that,
Yes.
or it's not my, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. So in your sexual interactions, having undetectable HIV, are you experiencing that stigma from other gay men in the community, online, if you're at a sex party, if you're, hooking up from apps, when you were going on dates, did it come up? Like I'm curious about the stigma as it comes to sex today and dating today as a gay man.
Yeah. The stigma definitely exists. I would say people are more confident on the apps because they're hiding behind a phone, hiding behind a profile. So sometimes every so often I get like a random message from someone who just sees my status on my profile and just wants to go off about something. And that's always like, whatever.
Like in a derogatory, like attacking kind of way?
Like, why are you on here? This is this. And it's so easy. I've gotten so used to just responding to that. It was a lot harder in college with my sex life to talk about it because I was in Ohio and people were coming from even smaller towns in Ohio, and it was a nice like awakening to like, I've basically become like a sexual educator with no degree because I'm just like having to have these conversations. And it's also like a huge turnoff for me and the other person to be like, let's talk about science, let's talk about HIV. But I think nowadays I don't see it as often, but it still exists. And I know a lot of people who have to have really weird conversations with people who are just so uneducated.
Yeah.
And I
Even within the gay community too.
Yeah. And it goes back to what I said earlier. It's like, well, you took the Mpox vaccine, you took this other the COVID vaccine, but like this other part of science you don't trust because of blah 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 blah. It's wild how quickly people can just flip a switch and be like, I'm not interested in you because of this. I'm not interested in you because of that. yeah, I think the stigma definitely still exists in the community, but I'm grateful that there are more people who are fine with it than there are people who aren't. So the people who aren't okay with it or are like, I don't want to have sex with someone who has HIV because of this, it's like, fine. Well, there's like 1,000 other people who would be fine with it. So yeah.
Can I ask you, I actually don't know the answer to this question, and maybe you can enlighten me, and it might be a choose your own adventure. As someone who is undetectable, do you feel obligated to disclose that information to people? Or do you think that because if it is undetectable and therefore non-transmittable, why do I have to inform people? Because I have heard some people say, like, if it's non-transmittable and I'm taking care of myself and I'm taking my medication and I'm diligent about it, it's now no longer your business to know. Yeah. I don't know. Like, how do you feel about that?
That is a muddy topic.
Yeah, very muddy.
It really depends. I would say depends on where you live. Because HIV is still criminalized in a lot of states. Interesting. Yeah, wow. There are a lot of states where people can easily criminalize someone because of their status. Ohio was one of those states.
Wow. And when you say criminalize, like, to talk to us more about that.
Yeah, like you can face like jail time for not disclosing your status to someone. Wow. Even if you are undetectable. I don't remember if that's still relevant in 2024, but I remember in college.
I bet it is.
There were, like I could have gotten like kicked out of college. It's so
so antiquated.
Yeah, and
we still can't donate blood.
Yeah,
what the fuck.
And
Gay
people
men
who
can't
are
donate blood. Yeah,
incarcerated
Gay men,
as well.
Period. You can't. If
They recently changed some of the laws, but they're still super antiquated. It's something like you can only donate blood if you have been with a committed partner that's fully 100% monogamous,
or you like
for
haven't
like
had
3
sex
years.
in a year. I'm like,
if you haven't had sex in like
good luck
a year or
finding
two
those
or something like that. Like it's like what? It still doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It's so it's absurd
and it's wild, and it's especially because it's so easy to test someone for HIV. So it's like, why not just give them like a test when they're there to draw blood? You can get test results back so quickly now.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'm curious about, you mentioned at the top of the episode about how many artists and, contributors to society that we lost to AIDS. I think about just a whole generation of incredibly talented, smart, brilliant people. Who knows, maybe the person who was
think about the San Francisco choir, like the choir.
Yes.
With, like the people in black and the people in white, and it's like,
and what if one of those people was going to cure cancer, or one of those people was going to be the Meryl Streep of our generation, or something?
Or just they don't even need to have.
No, of course. I'm not saying that like
but
they
also
had to be extraordinary.
But one of those people could be
extraordinary gays.
Like even something as easy as like that, like the queer representation of it all. One of those people could have been someone's gay neighbor growing up, and they could have just experienced what it was like to see two gay people happy and healthy, living their lives and growing up together. Yeah. It's crazy.
How many is there? This is maybe a statistic I'm grabbing for out of nowhere, but do we know about how many people were lost to AIDS in the early?
More than
too many people. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay,
we can look it up.
Yeah, we can look it up.
But the reason I talked about like artists for World AIDS Day is because of photography, but also it's I think when talking about HIV and AIDS today and talking about the loss or the scale of the loss, it's easier for people to visualize like a smaller population within that community. So I did get some like negative comments from people being like, this is dismissive to the general like the entire whole of people who were lost to AIDS. But I was like, as an artist myself and going from like my experience of art and like what I'm inspired by, you can visualize like the people who were the talented people who were lost to AIDS, like Michael Bennett, who did A Chorus Line, Dreamgirls,
famous choreographer.
Howard Ashman, who wrote the music for The Little Mermaid, with
beautiful documentary on Disney Plus called Howard. Watch it; it's amazing.
Yeah,
he wrote Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast, like all of our favorite Disney animated movies. He collaborated.
He voiced them.
It's on Disney Plus.
It's on Disney Plus. It's called Howard, and he passed away from AIDS.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's like a devastating but beautiful documentary.
Yeah.
So like all these, I think of all these like incredible contributions to society, and yes, even just being like an average everyday person is being an incredible contribution to society that now they're gone,
Yeah.
they're lost, which is
Yeah.
devastating. Do you feel, as a queer nightlife photographer and someone who is so ingrained and deeply enriched in the queer community as an artist, do you kind of feel like you're carrying the torch for the artists who have passed before, who never got their due, never got their chance, never got to express what they wanted to express?
I definitely feel motivated, and anytime I feel like, oh, this is so hard, or I'm feeling lost or anything, it's like, to make art for the sake of being able to make art is so beautiful. Just because a lot of people didn't have the opportunity to see like the scale of their impact, or didn't get to do everything that they wanted to do. So I feel like, to honor that loss, I choose to create. I don't know. It sounds so artsy.
No, it's
No,
beautiful.
it's
Yeah.
amazing.
And I think there are a lot of people in our generation who, because of PrEP and because it's so easy, PrEP, for people who don't know, is a pre-exposure
Prophylaxis.
prophylactic
Yes.
treatment. So you can basically take PrEP regularly, and that will stop HIV and AIDS from infecting your body.
I'm on PrEP, yes.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get. So for people who are sexually active, I highly recommend taking it. Just because I was 16, it can only be one person, it can be a whole thing.
Yeah.
It's so, yeah, I think for people who do take PrEP, it's so easy for our generation to think about HIV and AIDS as something that happened, and we've kind of moved forward because of PrEP. And I like to hear stories from people who lived through the early years of the AIDS epidemic in New York City or all over the country, and just honor their experience, because they're still with us. And there's a lot of people will be like, oh, there's so many young queer people today. And it's like, well, you think that because we've lost a huge
We
chunk
lost an entire
of
generation.
people who are baby boomers, and it's wild. And lots of artists and creatives and probably future politicians. Like, the world would just look so different today. I fully think the world would be just a better place.
I
if we
completely
didn't
agree.
have AIDS.
And it hit arts communities in particular very hard, because in general, queer people gravitate towards artistic queer spaces, or like artistic spaces. At least I did as a kid. Like, I felt more safe in art class than I felt in gym class. And I felt more safe in theater than I felt in, I don't know, like the debate club, because they were spaces where we were outcast essentially as a queer person. We were othered. And so that's why HIV and AIDS has hit in particular artsy communities more, because they're concentrated artistic people who just felt community there.
It's crazy. Like, imagine what it was like. I mean, if you were in a Broadway show, you have this little family, and every so often someone would be like, oh, this person's calling out because they're sick. And then you start to think, oh, is it because of this? And it was just such a terrifying time that eventually became normalized, and people were just becoming desensitized to it. That was so heartbreaking, because people were losing friends and colleagues. I can't even imagine what that was like. It just is, and I can empathize a little bit with it because of my status and the stigma, but just like the scale of losing people so quickly is wild. And that's why, like, the community, arts community, so there's lots of arts organizations or HIV and AIDS organizations that were built out of the arts, because it was like, we have to do something for our community because the government isn't doing anything, the state isn't doing anything about it. Like,
Which I think is particularly pertinent as we move into 2025.
Yeah.
So are there organizations that you, either in New York or on a larger scale, are there organizations that you recommend donating to or learning about or anything like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, like Broadway Cares, for
Broadway
sure.
Cares Equity Fights AIDS.
Yeah, Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS was created from two separate organizations in the 80s and combined in 1992, I believe. One of them being like the Producers Council, and then Actors Equity. So it was the community taking care of themselves. I mean, I found Broadway Cares, I was a theater kid growing up. So when I was 16 and I got this new diagnosis, I already knew of Broadway Cares.
That's
from
And Broadway Cares is...
Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS is this nonprofit that they're a huge fundraising organization. The Broadway community comes together at certain points throughout the year to gather and raise funds for underserved communities or people who are struggling with HIV and AIDS that can't maybe afford healthcare, vice versa. And they have a whole slew of resources that they're funding. And it's a lot of performers coming together, doing a concert. There's Broadway Bears, there's the Red Bucket Follies, there's the Easter Bonnet. There are all these.
Okay. And it's based in New York, but you don't necessarily have to be.
Yeah,
in New
it's
York.
a grant making organization.
Okay,
So they raise like millions of dollars. I believe
Millions.
since like 1988, it's been like over. The number in my mind, I want to say like $800 million. It's
Wow.
insane.
Beautiful.
And it's
Love that.
they award grants to organizations all over the country, including Puerto Rico and DC. And these are organizations that are providing like nutritious meals, counseling, healthcare, like basic human services, also like emergency relief for like natural disasters. So it's an incredible organization that provides a safety net for like all of humanity. And it's grown from just supporting like the HIV/AIDS initiative from Actors Equity in the 80s to like supporting everyone. And it uses like the power of community and theater to make that happen. So yeah, imagine being 16 years old and you're like learning about HIV and AIDS and you're so scared and worried, and then you like watch a YouTube video of like Red Bucket Follies or Broadway Bears, and you see AIDS in like glowing letters, and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So it became a huge part of my life, and it's
So
an
beautiful.
organization. Like my senior capstone project was a fundraiser for Broadway Cares. In college, I did another fundraiser, and when I moved to the city, I like made it a priority to like be involved and volunteer as much as I could. And it basically inspired a career shift away from performing arts to nonprofit fundraising, because I was like, this is something I feel like I'm good at and I'm passionate about. So I love Broadway Cares, like my mentors and like I've made a lot of incredible relationships within that organization. And
So beautiful.
yeah.
I love that.
Wow. I'm like
Oh, we have
devastated
a-
that we have to wrap this conversation.
No.
because I have like 1,000
Do you know what
other
I think we should do is a part 2. I think
We
we'll
should
do
definitely do a
two.
part
Oh my God, let's do
We'll
it.
bring you back
Yeah.
for a part
I
2.
would love that.
But we're also we're gonna do
Because-
the rapid fire really fast.
Okay.
We can't not do the rapid fire.
Okay.
You deserve a
Boots.
rapid fire.
You deserve a
round.
rapid
I love
fire.
it.
Okay.
Everyone deserves this.
So,
Just saying.
what a pivot to go from HIV and AIDS to being like, do you like grilled cheeses or ham
Oh my gosh.
sandwiches?
I was worried
So,
rapid
we're
fire
gonna
was going to
do
be HIV and AIDS questions rapid fire.
Oh no! Oh my God!
It
Imagine.
could not be less serious.
Okay, great. So we're gonna rapid fire as quick
Yeah.
as you possibly can.
Okay.
Respond. Alex,
Yeah.
take it away.
Okay, Christmas or Thanksgiving?
Christmas.
Would you rather have the ability to fly or the ability to read minds?
Fly.
Travel to space or deep sea dive?
Space.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Harrison Ford now or Harrison Ford in the 80s?
Oh, Harrison Ford in the 80s. Woof.
Absolutely.
Favorite dinosaur?
Triceratops.
Would you sign a petition to make Pluto a planet again?
Yeah.
Name any reindeer other than Rudolph.
Dasher.
Would you rather wear a cardigan sweater in 110-degree direct sunlight or be shirtless in the middle of a snowstorm?
A cardigan.
Kill, fuck, marry. Crayons, colored pencils, markers.
Fuck markers. Kill crayons. And then what was the other one?
Marry colored pencils.
Marry colored pencils.
Yes.
Yes.
Nailed it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
Beautiful.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, John.
It's the
that
shade
was
for me,
a
yeah.
beautiful conversation. I'm so grateful we
Really,
got to chat with you
really-
about
Thank you
this.
for having me.
being so
Yeah.
vulnerable and
Yeah.
sharing, and we'll spread resources
Yeah.
out there as well.
Yeah, and that's the secret sauce for talking about stigma is talking about HIV.
talking about it.
Just talking about it.
Talking about it.
Get off of
Couldn't
the
agree
what's in your
more.
mind and just have a conversation with your
Yes.
friends and get
Yes.
tested.
Yes.
I want to say briefly too, there is if you live in New York City, if you're listening and you live in New York State, you can text TESTNYC to 55676 and find testing locations and access to free and affordable PrEP in New York City.
We will have that
Gorgeous.
in the comments
We'll
on
put
the
that in the comments,
Instagram.
on the
I love it.
notes and all that.
And where can our followers find you online?
Oh my
social media,
gosh.
and your website. Where can they book a shoot?
Yes,
With you?
yes, book a
Yes.
shoot with me, please. You can find me on Instagram at JOHNLAGUCKI. That's my full name.
Great.
Instagram.
I like all
Great.
that as well.
All right,
Thank you so
John.
much.
Thank
we
you
love
so much.
Amazing.
This was
Thank you.
amazing.
Awesome.
All right, everyone.
All
Thank
right.
you so much for tuning in. We adore you. We adore you, John.
Yeah.
Everyone have an amazing day. Love you. Bye.
Bye.